Hey everyone, it's Kai from WCC, and today we're going to look at Genesis from Infinideity Cradle. Now, Genesis was kind of overshadowed in the previews by a lot of other clans, like Nova Grapplers, simply because people looked at the Astral Circle idea as a bit too slow. There's not really a good way to search out Valkerions, so what are the chances that this deck would actually be good? And this deck is actually okay. It's actually okay, and surprisingly enough, Genesis is decently competitive in the meta. There's actually two builds floating around. There's this Valkerion build, which I think is less consistent, a bit more high roll, but still does okay. And then there's also Himiko, which has done pretty well, actually. It's topped quite a few tournaments in Japan already. So that will be a deck for another day. We want to look at the new spicy cards with all the new cool effects. So we're going to look at the Valkerion build. Now, we'll jump into the deck build, talk a bit about it, and then where it currently fits on the metagame and how it plays. So right off the bat, we're running 4 Valkerion. Now, why are we running a grade 5 card that is just takes up space, makes it more inconsistent? Well, basically, Valkerion is your win condition. What it does is when you play it on your Astral Circle, you can look at the top 5 cards of your deck, put one of them to the drop zone, and gain drive checks equal to the grade that you mill. So when you mill a 3 or a 5, it's really good. It's really threatening as well. They better have a null guard to guard this, or they will be dead. Sometimes if you mill a 2, that's fine too, but you don't run as many grade 2s in this deck as other decks, and then you just feel bad if you mill a 0 or a 1. But that's rare. That's rare. You're basically going for a 2 and up. 2 and up is fine. You're running 4 Gleaming Lord Uranus. Now, this card is great. It's from the TD. Very simple effect. When it comes into play on a Vanguard or a Rearguard, you can Soul Blast 2 and gain an imaginary gift marker on your Vanguard circle. So, because it's just got good utility, it doesn't. There's no bad place to play him. When he rides a Vanguard or a Rearguard, it always gains the effect. That's why we're running 4 of this, just to accelerate our force markers. And then lastly, we're running 3 Asteros. Now, it's good. It's good because that means you save money from buying stuff from the set. But the other reason why we're only running 3 is that it only works on the Vanguard circle. So it's not as flexible as Uranus. The effect is that you can counterblast 1 and gain an imaginary gift force and put it on the Vanguard. And the other effect is that if your astral plane has a unit, you can Soul Blast 1 and draw a card. So second effect is pretty whatever. You just draw a card if you have a Valkerion. But when you have a Valkerion in your astral plane, you are already winning. But the reason why we're running 3 of this is because, yes, the effects only work on Vanguard Circle. And the important part of this deck is that you are trying to get 5 force markers on your first grade 3 ride. You're accelerating that play. When you do that, you have a very good chance to just destroy your opponent because they're just not prepared to guard all these massive columns. And then when you do go into a second grade 3 astral plane, then you don't really need a lot of other cards. I mean, when you think about Asteros, right, it generates 3 force markers on a second grade 3 turn. Yeah? Because when it comes into play, you get a force. Then you can counterblast 1 for another force. In the second turn, you can counterblast 1 for another force again. And basically, you just need 2 other sources of force marker generation to get your 5 force markers. So running more, like 4 Asteros, is kind of overkill, unless you're just fishing for him to mill for Valkerion. But otherwise, 3 is fine. Also saves you money, so good times, right? Onto the grade 2s. We are running 4 Mutsuki. Pretty self-explanatory effect. When you ride this on Vanguard, you can counterblast 1 and Soul Blast 1 to draw a card, and then gain a force marker. Pretty good. Just gets a force marker. On your path to victory when you ride this card, also, it's pretty annoying to guard when you guard this grade 2, because even at a boost, it's already hitting 20k. Unfortunately, weakness is that it's only on Vanguard effect, but I think the effect is already good enough that, yeah, if it was on the Rearguard effect as well, then it'd be just too good, right? You're running 2 Prometheus of Dancing Lights from the TD. When you play it, you can look at the top 2 cards of the deck and then put 1 card into your soul and 1 card on top of your deck. So you can guarantee triggers. You can also guarantee to trigger whatever you want. So that's very important. But basically, yeah, play this out. Play this with a Mutsuki. It's a very strong turn. If you stack a crit to the top, you're already on your way to winning. And the last card, the last place that you're running is 4 of the old Ulixes. So does what you want. It just lets you play it out early and draw a card from it after it attacks. It puts early game pressure. Remember when you're playing Genesis, you have these 2 giant Vanguard column swings. Well, not Vanguard column, but 2 giant swings of drive check. Your Valkerion and your Vanguard. And if they're at 3 when you're doing these swings, it is pretty annoying to guard them. Especially when Valkerion gets more than a twin drive. So Ulixes does exactly what you want. Early game pressure to push them up to that magical 3 damage counter, and then lets you draw cards so you can draw into your force marker generation cards. And then onto the grade 1s, we are running 4 Deputized Bear. Now, this card is just kind of there to search your Valkerion. So when you play it, look at the top 7 cards of your deck and reveal 1 Valkerion from among them, and then shuffle your deck. And then if you put a card into your hand, if you have 2 or less force markers, put a card from your hand into Soul. So ideally, you don't want to ride this before grade 3 because it's pretty hard to generate 2 force markers before grade 3. After that, you are already plussing all the time. You've got 1 force from Vanguard, and then your Vanguard usually generates another force, and then you just need something else done. You don't have to discard. I mean, you don't have to put into Soul any card. Good times. You're also running Atlas of Heavenly Sphere. Oh, hang on. Yeah, Atlas of Heavenly Sphere. A very self-explanatory effect as well. When you, it's an act, counterblast 1, put it to Soul and draw a card. And if your Vanguard is an Astral Poet, so it has to be grade 3, you get an Imaginary Gift Force and you put it on your Vanguard circle. So just helps you generate force markers on your Vanguard. Also has another effect for Vanguard circles. When you place it, you can Soul Charge 1, but not extremely relevant. And then here we're going to show you the spoilers. We're running grade 1 nulls. Okay, so that means we're running 12 crit. Now, 12 crit is great. You don't have to run... If you don't like 12 crit, if you don't like running the grade 1 nulls, you can always play Velva and run Kushinadas. So Velva, we'll just quickly talk about it. When you place it, counterblast 1, and it gains 10k guard until end of turn. If your Vanguard is an Astral Poet, get an Imaginary Gift Force and put that on the Vanguard. So help you generate force markers. Gets fat, which is nice. But honestly, any way is fine. You can run nulls, you can run Velva. They all kind of fit a similar role in that it increases your guard potential. This deck is surprisingly resilient. You can easily survive 2 big turns simply because you've got 12 crit, which is extra guard than normal, or you're running Kushinadas with Velva, which basically is like a counterblast 1 heal. It's like heal trigger, I guess? Like 20k guard? The counterblast is largely irrelevant in this deck. You don't really use counterblast 1 that much. You have Atlas, that's it. You got your Asteros, that's about it. And that's it, right? You've got Mutsuki as well, yeah. But overall, this deck is very counterblast light. If you trigger 1 heal in one of your drive checks, which is quite possible because you got more drive checks than your opponent, then you're pretty much set for the entire game. You're easily going to generate your 5 force markers with more to spare. So Velva is correct. Nulls is correct. 12 crit is spicy and correct, or not. Or if you just want to get 8 crit is fine too. I think they're all correct. It is really up to you. There is very little difference. So we're just going to lay out most of the deck here now. Since you already told you're running 12 crits, so we don't really need you to go through all the crits, but here, just go. It's 12 crit. Where does this deck sit? Well, how does it really play, right? So, very simple deck to play. Generate 5 force markers ASAP. You want to generate 5 force markers as soon as you hit grade 3, because that is a big difference between a normal build, like a normal slow build, or a turbo build. And basically, this deck is trying to do turbo. And look, if you don't generate 5 force markers by the first grade 3 turn, then you're just playing a normal slow Valkerion deck, which is all right. It does that same thing as a normal deck would, but you just have the added bonus of hitting the nuts and hitting 5 force markers. as soon as possible. How it actually plays out, though, is that you've got a lot of Excel decks right now, and Excel is not Protect, so that is a very good thing, because that means your opponent cannot generate those nice null guards that they would like to guard your Valkyrians. So you basically get to a position where your opponent just has to no guard and pray that you don't crit them. And that's good. That's good for your deck, because you kind of need to high roll a bit with Genesis. So when you get into those situations, technically it's benefiting you more than your opponent. It's pretty easy to get to those positions because you're turboing out your grade 3s. And then against everything like, what is it now? Like, your only bad matchup right now is probably Nubatama, just because they play Protect. Against everything else, like Murakumo, it's okay. Murakumo obviously is slightly more favored, but you can definitely survive at least 2 turns just because the defensive potential of this deck is quite decent compared to a lot of other decks. Other things in the format, Pale Moon, same situation. They do draw more so they can dig quicker to getting their nulls, but otherwise, it is pretty much just the same game plan for every single deck out there. You face, the only bad times is when you face Protect, so Nubatama, but then things like Mega Colony isn't popular in the West. Dark Irregulars is losing popularity, I guess, so they're not as relevant. You'll find Shadows, same game plan. They do push you slightly a bit, but again, you have good defensive options. So surprisingly, this deck is quite fun to play. Well, fun in that you flip a lot of cards off the top of your deck. Sometimes it's frustrating because your Valkyrion absolutely misses. It's just a big 70k beat stick that your opponent no guards. But that's what happens in Standard, right? So just get luckier. So we can talk about Himiko later on in another build. I want to investigate that build a bit more. I think it's really interesting. I think it recently topped Nagoya in a team tournament. So Genesis does have this other build that you can test out. If you're OG and you have all the old stuff, then that could be for you. So the only clan we have left now is Angel Feather, and we all know how good Angel Feather is. It is so good. It is so good. Jokes, or maybe not, but we'll look into that next. In terms of where this deck sits in the tier list, I'll actually push it up a bit into tier 2. It's actually a pretty decent Forest Clan, simply because there's just fat Vanguard twin drive columns that will, or multiple drive columns that is just pretty annoying to guard in the current meta when everyone's playing Excel. So that's good. That's good. So Genesis, surprisingly decent compared to Novas. I actually don't like Novas. I'm sorry, guys. I'm not a big fan of Novas. But yeah. So lots of bias there. See you in the next Angel Feather video. It should be pretty interesting, I guess. That great support that it just got. So, bye.